Connolly O'Brien, could we talk about your father in the middle of his family? Did he play games with the children?
Well, I don't think it was so much games as I remember. I remember him wanting us to sing and wanting us to dance and getting us to recite. But I wouldn't say it was games as we understand games nowadays.
Had he great powers of concentration?
Oh, marvelous, marvelous. In our living room, there was a big round table, which we used to have our meals on when we had visitors, not when the family was there. But he used to sit at one side of it, writing. Others around the other corners of it doing their homework. And be some sitting on playing some game sitting on the hearthrug of the fire, and he'd work away through all this din and talk and everything else. And if you wanted to get his attention, you had to go over and touch him. He would absolutely cut that all out.
Had you favourites in the family?
Well, I like to think I was his favourite, but I think it was between myself and the youngest sister, Fiona. He was very fond of her. She was always... She had the right to his knee. He couldn't sit at a table, but she'd sit at his knee. And I remember sometimes it got rather awkward, and he wanted her down. So I remember one day he said to her, "Oh, you can't sit on Daddy's knee. He says, Daddy's got a bone in his knee." And she looked at it, she says, "Oh, poor Daddy, poor Daddy, but you got another knee."
Did he have a special nickname for you?
Well, whenever I was what I call riding the high horses, he used to say Gwendoline Violet. Now, Gwendoline Violet, and that brought me down to reality and down, put my feet back on the ground.
And did he bring a great many visitors to the home?
Oh, yes. We never knew who was coming to the house or when they were coming, and we never knew whether somebody was going to stay or somebody wasn't going to stay. But Mother was accustomed to that, She never made a big fuss over anybody coming. If they came, they took potluck with the family, and if they didn't like it, well, Mama couldn't help that. But everybody liked coming to the house, young and old. The people got very fond of Mama, as well as having an admiration and respect for my father. They got very fond of Mama.
Who was the boss at home, your father or your mother?
Oh, I think Mother. But any time we suggested something to Daddy, he'd say, "Well, now, what does Mama say?" Or we'd ask him, could we do so and so? Well, ask Mama. There's no such thing as, I'm the boss, and I can override Mama. But if Mama agreed, or if he thought that Mama was, but if he thought Mama was forbidding us something that there was a little bit of injustice in it, he'd talk it over with her. And then they'd both say, "Well, we talked it over and we think you can do so and so."
Do you remember him ever losing his temper?
Oh, I do. He had a very hot temper, but he had great control over it. Great control. But he used to go white. The control he put on himself, his skin, he'd go quite white in the face, and his jaw would shut out. It was fighting against giving rein to his temper. One thing always roused his anger, and he never would accept any excuses. There wasn't such a thing as an excuse for it. Was anything in the way of a lie or a misstatement. No, nothing could justify that. Nothing at all. And then we'd sort of cower before the lecture he would give us, the rage. He was very strong on that.
And he took a hand in your own education at home?
Oh, yes. He was always advising us books to read. He was always bringing home books. Always some kind or other. And when he went away for any length of time. When they came back, he'd always bring presents, and the presents were always books. To us, it was different, the things he brought to Mama, but to us were always books. And he wasn't content just to give you a book and say, well, read it or not, just as you like. But he'd ask you about it. He'd ask you what you thought of it. And he'd ask you questions about it, see if you understood it. And if you thought you'd taken it up wrong, well, he'd explain that to you. Oh, he was very, very much of a reader himself, and I think he wanted to develop it in us. And he did develop it. We all have a big vice, and that's reading.
When he was away from home, did he keep in contact?
Oh, he always wrote. He always wrote to Mama. He wrote to us, to different members of the family, if there was something that he thought they'd be interested in. But we always got postcards, picture postcards, to show us the sort of place he was in.
Did he have any mannerisms?
Well, I don't know. The one that I remember most is the one that when he was thinking of considering some scheme, and he was thinking very clearly. So really, he'd put the finger up like that, you know. No, not that finger, that finger. And he'd press in, and he'd think and think and think. And when you see that sliding down, you'd know he'd come to a decision on something.
Did he ever talk to the family at home about socialism?
No, he didn't talk to us as a theory, but things that happened, he would explain them to us so that we always got what he would call the right point of view on it. And then he used to read books to us, and they were all books that had a definite revolutionary tinge, always social justice.
Did he talk much about his own past?
Only now and again when something would crop up and he'd tell us about it, like they were telling us about the being so poor that they couldn't have pencils or pens to write with, and how he used to burn a bit of stick at the turf fire and write with that, because they were so poor they didn't have any lamps. It was too dear for them to have a lamp, too much money from their lamp, and that he would get down by the turf fire and do his exercises at them that way.
Was he careful about his dress?
Very tidy, very neat. Practically always the same thing he got, a navy blue suit, black shoes, and don't remember in my whole lifetime ever seen him with brown. He'd have black. And it's a little collar, turned down collar, not a pointed collar, just turned down. And he would always wore a striped tie, mainly a blue one with a red stripe, or a red one with a blue stripe. Something like that was the colour that he would have.
Was he fond of his cup of tea?
Oh, fond. We used to say that if he had as much tea as he could drink in one room and went into the next room and somebody said, would you like a tea, cup of tea, Mr. Connolly? He'd say he would and take it. Oh, yes, he was very fond of tea. I think it was his chief liquor. He didn't didn't take any intoxicating liquors at all. And it was drink, I think, was his chief exhilarator. But I remember, too, we used to... he wasn't one of these rabid teetotalers, It was just they didn't do for him. Because he would go in with friends to a pub, and they would order what they liked, and he would have his lemonade or something like that. The other teetotalers wouldn't see themselves inside, at the time when he was alive. They're not. Teetotalers are a bit more broad-minded just now. They don't mind going into a pub and asking for a fruit drink. But in those days, it took a bit of courage.
Would you call your father a religious man?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say he was irreligious or anti-religious, but I think it's just part of the general make-up. It wasn't outstanding. It didn't develop as out of everything he said and did as his socialist or nationalist philosophy did. But the only memory I really have of him on that line was once he came to Mass with me, and the the priest began to attack without naming him. But something, I forget just now, so long ago what it was, something that he was concerned with. And everybody round about knew that it was Connolly, and you could feel the heads turning around and turning around from each side, you know. And I put out my hand, I said, come on, get up. Come on, we're not sit and listen to this. And he just put his hand, he shoved me down. He said, you sit down, he said. You sit down. He said, let him have his say. He said, we want our say too. But that's the only outstanding thing that I remember that time, that he wouldn't let me get up and march out, you know, and protest. I was to stay there. Let him have his say.
Was he popular with the factory girls in Belfast?
Oh, he was very popular with everybody, whoever came anyway in contact with him. I think they all had a sort of daughterly feeling towards him, you know, and they looked upon him as a fatherly figure, one who was concerned about them. Oh, they used to follow him about, and if you went down when they were coming out of work, there was always some remark from Mr. Connolly, you know, and the time when he had organised, you know, and got a lot of improvements in the conditions of the dockers on the docks and the transport workers. Well, most of these girls were at some of those those men in their family, but there was no union for the girls at that time. They were no members of his union in the of women. But when they felt that there was terrific injustice being done to them by them being ordered they weren't to talk, or they weren't to sing during the working hours, they felt that was really the last straw. And they all came out on strike, and they all came down to Mr. Connolly to carry on the strike for them. There was no funds for them or anything else like that. And the only thing you could do was, we got our collecting boxes and tried to collect money to give them pay to keep them along, and run meetings and telling people, public meetings telling people what was being done. And because there was a foregone conclusion that they couldn't win, the mill owners were too strong and all that. So he called them along to a meeting, and he told them, he said, no, you're not beaten. He says, you just got to go back because we've no more money for you. And but don't go back as if you were beaten. Don't go back in ones. Don't slink back. Don't go back in ones and two. All join together at one place and all go back at the same time, and all go back singing, every one of you. And when you go into your, I forget what the term they call the places they worked in the mills, they have a special term for that. I can't remember what. But it says when you get inside, if any girl talks and is told to stop talking, well, you all begin talking. And if any girl gets so above herself as to sing, and she's reprimanded and told to stop, well, the whole room must begin to sing. So they followed that out, and they were quite delighted because it worked, and this restrictive practice was abolished.
To come on to the rising, Mrs. O'Brien, you made breakfast for the leaders on Easter Sunday morning.
I did. I had that rare privilege, and I'll never forget it. They all came down to Liberty Hall. They didn't come all at once, you know. They came now and again. I think it was Tom McDermott came by himself, and so did Tom Clark. And you wouldn't know, suddenly one of them would erupt into the room. They all came by different ways, of course, they were all out in different places. But they just got the common, ordinary Irish breakfast of bacon and eggs, rashers and eggs and tea. But I can see them sitting in that little room in Liberty Hall, one or two. There was never more than two at the table because only a small table.
MacDonagh, he used to joke you a lot, used he?
He was a very gay soul. I always felt, that he lifted the atmosphere in any place up to a gay level. I don't know what it was about him, because he wasn't a big person, He was rather slight, not tall, but I remember now when we were going away, you see, they were sending us back to the north with the dispatches from the council, Pierce and the others, and we were watching out. They wanted to get us out so that we would be back in the north by 12 o'clock. And 12 o'clock was the time they were going to start here in Dublin. So we were fussing and getting excited, and I remember him saying, "Fine lot you are, big strapping girls like you." He said, "And all you're anxious to do is to get out of the city, and we're on the brink of a revolution." I can remember that so well.
And when the rising was over and your father was in Dublin Castle, could you describe the last couple of times you saw him?
Yes. The first time I saw him was in the afternoon. And he was just in a little room. He went up the stairs, up the staircase, and turned to the right. And there was a little room off that. There were soldiers all the way up the stairs. And they seemed to have been using the landing too for sleeping quarters, because there were those sort of mattresses there, the little flat mattresses that you see. And there were 2 soldiers on guard at the door. And when my mother was with me, and when we went into the room, there was an officer in uniform, but he was a medical officer. I don't think he had any. Before we went in, we were told we weren't to give him any news at all. We weren't to discuss what had happened, and it was just personal matters we were to discuss with him. So of course we said all right. But I think some bits of news had slipped through to him the way things do. And he knew some of the event, but he was concerned with leaving us, you see, what would happen to a family of mainly girls and mother. And if he was thinking from the old days, you see, all the misery, and be no life for us at all. So he advised us to go to the States. And then he had some of his writings. He wanted me to get in touch with Sheehy Skeffington and get him to arrange it. So of course that was the last straw. I tried to keep by the rules until then, but I said, "Skeffington's gone." And he said, "What?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "In Portobello Barracks," and just left it at that, because I didn't want to be sent out of the room for fear there's something else I might get to him. So we were discussing things, and I told him then, I said, "There's great talk among everybody that because you're wounded that you won't be executed." And he said, "No," he says, no. "There's no hope of that," he says. "That's, I remember what had happened to Sheepers in South Africa. He was wounded and they executed him." He says, that'll have no effect on what they decide to do." So it was that. But Mother was terrible, Mama couldn't, I don't know. It wasn't a thing one wants to go back on very much. But he was very calm and very cool, and I asked him, was he suffering much pain? He said no, he wasn't suffering very much pain, that it eased a good bit. But he felt very helpless lying there, and he said to me, then that was the time he told me about the young boy. He said, well, he couldn't be more than 14, that was carrying right by his head at the stretcher when they were carrying him out of the GPO. And how the little boy, any time a bullet seemed to come near, would move his body so he'd get it instead of my father. And he would talk about what had happened, but not what had happened, and there was no talk of what might have happened since he was a prisoner. But he was saying they really were marvellous. He said he was so happy that it had happened and that he had taken part in it, you know. And he said, it was then he started telling me about their boy, and then he said, you know, Nora, he says, well, we have that type of youngster in Ireland. He says, Ireland won't last long unfree. He said, we'll get freedom sometime. He said, if it's not in our generation, the next generation. It'll come. He was very proud of these boys. Matter of fact, he put it in his statement to the court-martial. How I thank God that it allowed him to live to see the day when thousands of Irish men and boys and hundreds of Irish women and girls would rise, you know. There wasn't very much conversation because they didn't let us stay very long that time. The next time I saw him, we were wakened up. It was about 1 o'clock at night. And the message that was given was that the prisoner, James Connolly, wanted to see his wife and eldest daughter. And Mama, it jumped to my mind immediately, you know, all had been executed up to then except himself and Sean McDermott. Immediately jumped to my mind that he was going to be executed. But Mama had the idea that he wasn't well, that it had taken a turn for the worst. Anyway, we got ready and we went down. We were taken in an army lorry right through Dublin. It was an awfully queer, eerie trip, because we were staying in William O'Brien's house at that time, coming down through O'Connell Street, and all the still smelled burning, you know, they still got that horrible smell of burning, and not a soul on the streets because there was curfew, you know, at that time. And you went through the dimly lit streets and not a soul. You didn't even see a soldier until we came to the bridge. There was some there, and we went up to the castle. I don't think I told you in the first visit, but every time we went there, we were searched to see that we didn't bring anything in, I suppose, to help mend his life or something like that. But the last time we went up there, the nurse said, I'm supposed to search you. But she said, you give me your word, you have nothing that he can do away with himself with, he said, and I won't search you. So Mama said, she said, what do you think? She said, we would help him to die. So she didn't search us, but she pulled us away. She said, keep away, she said, in case they might look just through the keyhole or open the door suddenly and they say I wasn't doing my job. So then after she kept us there for a while, and then she opened the door and she called us, said, all right, and then as we went up. So when we got into my father, he said, well, Lily, he said, I suppose you know what this means. I said, oh no, not that. He said, yes, Lily. She broke down then and she said, but your beautiful life, James. She said, your beautiful life. And he said, wasn't it a full life, Lily, and isn't this a good end? And she still cried, so he says, look, Lily, please don't cry. He says, you'll unman me. So she tried to control herself. I was trying to control myself too. Then he said to me, put your hand down on the bed. So I put it down on the bed. And he said, that's a copy of my statement to the court-martial. Try and get it out. So the piece of paper was folded up very tightly, not bigger than that. So I took it anyway. And we were there, talked about little things. He was trying to plan our life for after he was gone, and then they told us time was up and we'd have to go. He used to be shot at dawn, you see. So Mum, we couldn't get Mum away from the bed. The nurse had to come finally and help her away. And I went to the door, and then I went back to him. That was the last I saw him. But we went back in the morning, to claim his body. We thought we'd have to put in the claim anyway. Of course, they wouldn't hear of it. But Mama had asked the nurse, when she was helping her from the room, she says, "Get me a lock of his hair." And she did that. She posted to Mama afterwards. But when we went back to see about getting his body, of course, there was no hope for it. And then we went to see Father Aloysius, who was with him. And I couldn't understand how they could execute him, because he was there in bed helpless. And they had this big cage up over his legs, and how they could get him. So I asked Father Aloysius how they did it. Oh, he said they took him on a stretcher and they carried him down to the ambulance, and an ambulance took him to Kilmainham jail, and there they sat him on a chair. And he said before he died, I asked him would he say a prayer for the men who are about to shoot him. And he said, "I'll say a prayer for all brave men who do their duty." You know, it was a funny thing that one of that firing squad came to my mother afterwards and told her he was one of the firing squad, and he felt he couldn't go on living unless she forgave him for being on it. He said, "It's a terrible thing." He says, "I'm a Welshman." He said, "I've been in the labour movement all my life." He says, "And that I should send a bullet into that man." Oh, he was very much upset. Mama said, "Don't worry." He says, "You only did your duty." And he said he would do a prayer for all men who do their duty.
Mrs. Connolly O'Brien, thank you very much indeed.